Now, let's come back to the Baroque. And I start out with the controversy that exists in Baroque scholarship about the transferability of the Baroque. And to give it some kind of plasticity, some kind of profile, I take extreme examples, extreme positions, so we can kind of set out that there's a space in between those extremes where we want to situate ourselves. The two extreme positions are, on the one hand, a limited transferability. That is a typological approach to the Baroque. I think it's not completely new what I'm going to explain here, but I need these two extremes to work with. So we have this Baroque, the people would say Baroque is a type of culture, is an artistic style, is an aesthetic paradigm. It can emerge then anywhere, anytime, as a matter of principle. And here, of course, we have the example of Eugenio d'Ors. I think he represents this in an extreme way in his 1935 book. Yeah, I read it in French. The title is Du Baroque. And he has a radically typological approach. He says things like the Baroque is a constant and permanent type of human culture, is a general tendency of culture, is a human constant, and he goes as far as to use the term archetype, is a cultural archetype. And I think it comes close to something Nietzsche put up with the Apollinian and the Dionysian. So it goes that deep into permanent structures in cultural life. And at the end, I have here a quote in French, la tendance générale à laquelle obéit le baroque dans toutes les manifestations, en tout temps, dans toutes les époques. The general tendency in any period, any place, the general tendency in which the Baroque has to obey or obeys. So that's one attitude. Interesting, I give you just a little glimpse into transfers. When Alejo Carpentier in 1975, within the Americanismo discourse, takes up the question of the Baroque in a text, Lo Barroco y lo Real Maravilloso, he starts out referring to Eugenio d'Ors. And he heavily relies on him, and he takes the word Baroque over to Barroco to Barroquismo. That makes it more abstract, a tendency, exactly. And that opens the door for him to make a big transfer to Latin America. That Eugenio d'Ors is the one who opens the door for that kind of transfer. And then Alejo Carpentier goes into a rather heavy identity construction of Latin American culture on that basis. So you see what interest is behind it also. Or rapidly to Heinrich Wölfflin. Well, he has this 1888 Renaissance und Baroque, which is a completely different piece than 1915 Principles of Art History, where he really becomes the famous theoreticians of what a Baroque style is. So he says Baroque is an artistic style, and you can read this style, if you know the principles of that style, you can read on the phenomenological surface of any artwork and say, this is Baroque, this is not Baroque. You can then go into it and decide what is Baroque and what is not. But this would be rather ahistorical. Now, it's not true that Wölfflin is so ahistorical. Many times I think one overlooks something in Heinrich Wölfflin, which is that he combines it with something that would be the history of the gaze, or the history of ways of seeing. Martin Jay has been working on that too. And that is much more historical. This is kind of anthropological history, or history of anthropology, not anthropological history. So Wölfflin is not that much of a pure typologist. It's a more interesting case. But anyway, he would be rather on the typology side. Now, let me go to the other side, which is the other extreme. And I take the example of José Maraval, and I take another example by João Adolfo Hansen, a Brazilian. Now, in Maraval, it's quite clear, and it's not polemically, but militantly clear, that he wants to take the Baroque as a cultural epoch, period concept. And he says, he rejects those who, this is a quotation, who use the term to designate morphological or stylistic concepts repeatable in culture that are chronologically and geographically disparate. So he attacks here Guelphin and well, Guelphin, yes, but more in the doors. And well, he says something like this: the Baroque then is a historical concept, quite clear. It encompasses approximately the first 3/4 of the 17th century, having a center of greater intensity and fuller significance between 1605 and 1650. And then he says it can also exist in Europe in general, but it's a Spanish thing. So we have this very militantly historical approach to the Baroque, which is opposed to Doris's approach. And interestingly, for me, I've put that in a piece I've done earlier. Interestingly, he is not consistent, because in Maraval you find those interesting moments when he says, well, Calderón de la Barca, that's like a Hollywood movie today. Yes. And at once he makes a jump into the 20th century. But that's mostly interesting for me. His inconsistencies are the most interesting aspect of Maraval, in part for what we do here. Now, let's look at a Brazilian debate. There was a Brazilian debate going on. Two books came out in 89, one by Haroldo de Campos, O Sequestro Barroco na Formação da Literatura Brasileira, how Baroque was kidnapped in the formation of Brazilian literature. That's a reference, a polemical reference to Antonio Cândido, who has written that book, The Formação da Literatura Brasileira. It's an attack, and the attack goes like that. He couldn't even account for the big Brazilian poet Gregório de Matos, who was at the beginning of that formation. Because in his logic, the beginning would be simple, would be the infancy of culture. So the beginning in Brazilian was the most complex thing. So it doesn't work that the concept of formation. So he goes against it. And then João Adolfo Hansen, who is a very good philologist and is a specialist of the 17th century, he counterattacked Haroldo de Campos in his book O Satira e o Engenho, again a book on the poet Gregório de Matos, and he kind of said this is completely wrong to talk about Baroque today, and then he has a piece which is a polemical piece, O Postmoderno e Barroco, 94, and he is overdoing it there, but he comes out with things like, let me try to translate a few things from the Portuguese. Now, it's very much kitsch and sensual, he says, sensual. Very liberador, esvaziar toda negação heurística. If we use Baroque today, it doesn't have a heuristic function, Hegelian, a negation of anything. It doesn't have historical determination. We take down Baroque in quotation marks as an allegory of a form without function. That's one of the attacks. As a pure ornament. And this allegorizes the pleasure, o gozo, that pleasure, immediate pleasure of a performative spectacle, like a simulacrum, like a sign of the absolute aestheticization of the inatualidade do atual, of the non-presentness of the present time. That is, we are out of history. This is a very big attack against his enemies. In other words, this use of the term refers all the contemporary arts, to a symptom that the artistic practices are freeing themselves from the imperativos ilustrados. That means from modern culture, that is from enlightenment. That's the other side. That's what he defends. Right? Because the tradition of Western arts were submitted to the principles of enlightenment since the 18th century. So that's what we have for a long time, and now you come back with this Baroque stuff. And then he says, this symptomatic use for that is also a process of dehistoricization, historicization. And it says that everything goes. He uses it in English. So you see the kind of attack line against very polemical. So this is one of the positions.